Welcome back. Isn't it amazing again how much they can cover there in just a few minutes? In this case, taking us through that entire book of Ruth and pairing it with their graphics that help us to see what's going on. The only thing I wanted to clarify about how they presented things in the video is that at the end of the video, we meet this man who is a closer relation to Naomi and Ruth and could be the kinsman redeemer. As the narrator in that video we just watched talks about this situation, it appears to me that he makes it out that the main reason this man does not want to marry Ruth is the fact that she is a Moabite. Well, in the scriptures, we do not see that at all. The man is concerned about, he says, his inheritance. In other words, he's worried that if he goes ahead and marries Ruth and then tries to propagate a line of children for that family, what exactly does that mean for his current household and the inheritance that he would leave them? So he seems to be concerned mostly about practical matters more than he is where this woman comes from or where she is born. Why does that matter? Well, because the Bible indeed does talk a lot about not intermarrying with those who do not believe in the one true God. And in the Old Testament, this is often manifested by God saying, don't marry those people from other nations. But we need to understand the problem is not just that they're born in those other nations, as if the problem is their nationality or their race. The problem is their religion. God forbids marrying these other people from these other nations because they have other gods. But what do we have in this story? Well, Ruth, by the time she gets back, has indeed become a true Israelite by faith. We hear her confession that she makes to Naomi, that Naomi's God will be her God. And therefore, it's not problematic at all to marry her anymore because now she indeed believes in the one true God. And that's important for this story. It's important for our life also that we understand that God does not care who we marry as far as where they're born or what they look like, but he does have grave amounts of concern about whether we marry someone who also worships him, who believes in him. And so I just wanted to make that one clarification before we go on. But with that said, then we can go ahead and just look at the basics of this book of Ruth. And as you know, if you've been watching these videos, we usually do this sort of by looking at a few questions up front. The first question is always who, and when we ask that question who, we're always looking for who wrote this book. And in this case, we don't know. This book of Ruth, we're not sure exactly when it was written down or who wrote it down. We'll go on to the next question, which is what? And as we heard there, it is this Israelite woman, Naomi's story, who experiences so much hardship and yet by the end is redeemed by her God and brought much joy. So you heard the whole story there, but that's the basic outline of the story. This woman who has so much trouble and then is redeemed. Then her family ends up giving birth to a child, which then is going to be in the line of the Messiah. When did this book occur? Well, what we're told is that it occurred in the days of the judges, and so we would put this book approximately at 1000 BC. Where did it occur? Well, mostly in two places. First, Bethlehem of Judah, of course, of fame for being Jesus' birthplace later, but that is where they are from originally, and then, of course, they're in Moab for part of the time as the famine is going on, and this tragedy befalls Naomi. Why is this book in the Bible? Well, because it does teach us the simple lesson again that God redeems his people out of trouble and gives them new joy, new hope, new life. So I think that's the main reason that we get this. It does also, as the video suggests, just shows us how God is involved in the ordinary events of our lives. Things that might not appear to be quote-unquote spiritual events, indeed are all carried out under God's watchful hand. And so that is important to know as well. And finally, of course, it is here to remind us that this is part of the story of our Messiah, Jesus. This is part of his family history, so to speak. Let us then turn to a couple of the key verses from this book. We'll start with Ruth Chapter 1, 1 through 5. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of the wife Naomi, and the names of their 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephraimites of Bethlehem in Judah. They went into the country of Moab and remained there, but Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They took Moabite wives. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other was Ruth. They lived there about 10 years. Both Mahlon and Chilion died, so that the woman was left with was left without her 2 sons and her husband. So here we get the setup for this story, and a very tragic setup at that, right? First, they have to move from their homeland because there is a great famine that God has brought about, and so they have to be a bit nomadic to go and find where there is food. So they go to Moab, and when they get there, though, while they might find food, they also find tragedy because Naomi's husband dies. Then her 2 sons, after marrying, they both die. And so we end up with this Israelite woman, Naomi, living in Moab without a husband or sons, no one to provide for her needs, and all she's left with is these 2 daughters-in-law. Of course, one of those is going to be Ruth, who, of course, is at the center of this story. But that's kind of how this all gets started. We kind of get this set up here, where they are and what the great tragedy is. Let's move on then to Ruth 1, verses 16 and 17. It says, "But Ruth said, 'Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you.'" This is perhaps the most famous verses in this entire book. In fact, these verses are often used on the occasions of weddings, even though originally, right, this is spoken between a mother and her daughter-in-law. We can understand why it would be used at a wedding, because it speaks about this absolute loyalty that one person is showing to another, and a loyalty that will last unto death. So it certainly is appropriate to use at wedding ceremonies. But in the story itself, this is an important point because Ruth understands now that she has these daughters-in-law who have no husband and no way to provide for them, and she's worried about them, and so she just decides, practically speaking, that their best chance to remarry would simply be to return back to their people and search for a husband there. Now remember, at this time, we don't know that either of these women have been converted to the true faith. It doesn't appear so up until this statement by Ruth. And so you can see here, too, if they were of the true faith, would she have told them to go back home to their land and find a godless husband? Probably not. We are speculating a little bit there, but mostly she's being practical, trying to make sure these women have a good life, and trying to make sure, that she is sending them in the best way for that to be possible. But anyways, we get here this beautiful story then of Ruth, who shows this loyalty to her mother-in-law and ends up professing faith in the one true God. She says, not only am I going with you, but I'm all in on everything that you are. I'm going to go where you go. I'm going to live where you live. And yes, I'm going to have your God be my God. And so we get this wonderful return to the land, although the trouble and tragedy is certainly not all over yet, but they do return together. Let's turn then to Ruth 2:3. "So she set out and went and gleaned in the field of the reapers, and she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the clan of Elimelech." Okay, now we get a couple things here. She goes back, and there was a practice that God had commanded in the Old Testament that after the people would go through and harvest their grains, also their olives, things like that, they would then be told to leave some behind, or at least not be so precise as to take everything with them. And once they had went through once, then those who had no means otherwise to produce a living for themselves could come along and could benefit from that grain so long as they went out and got it. So that's what Ruth is doing here, and we're told that she ends up in Boaz's field. And of course, the key thing with Boaz at this point is he is of the clan of Elimelech, right, who is Naomi's husband. So he's family. Now, Ruth does not know this until she goes back and talks to Naomi, but that's, as we read it, we kind of know what's going on here a little bit, that this is a family member who ends up taking good care of Ruth and eventually marrying her. But let's not get too ahead of ourselves in the story. Ruth 2:20 says this, "And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, May he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. Naomi also said to her, This man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers." All right, so we've got several things here, right? First, just this idea that, what a wonderful thing that Boaz is not only doing what's required by the law, but he's going out of his way to make sure that Ruth and her family, now including Naomi, will have enough to eat. So he is a good man here, a noble man, and Naomi recognizes that to start. And then she says, and there's even something better. He's one that can not only help today, but could help in the grandest sense of things, which is to redeem this whole situation. What does that mean? Well, again, as the Israelites have gone into the promised land, the land is divided up, right? Not only according to clans, or tribes, but then after that, divided up into individual family plots. And God had arranged in his law that if someone came upon hard times and had to leave behind that land, one of their family members could purchase that land and therefore keep it in the family, keep it as that wonderful possession that God had given to them. Although the other part of this is that the tragedy, if the tragedy that had befallen that person also involved the loss of their husband, then the Redeemer also would marry that woman and have children with her who would be reckoned as her first husband's children. So it would continue their line after tragedy. So that's what's all here. Now, again, we want to say real quick, Redeemer is a word we know quite well to speak about Jesus. And think about this, right? That what Boaz is ultimately doing is rescuing people out of great trouble and bringing them now back to a place where they can have joy and they can experience this continued life. That's what Jesus does for us as well. Let's go on to Ruth chapter 4, verse 9. It says, Then Boaz said to the elders and all the people, You are witnesses this day that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and Mahlon, and Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon. I have bought to be my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brothers and from the gate of his native place. You are witnesses this day. So we heard in the video about the whole thing of how this all went down, right? How Ruth goes to Boaz and he agrees to marry her. And then there is this other man, right, that is closer in relation. So he has both the right and perhaps the responsibility to do this redeeming act, but he does not, as we talked about, because he's concerned with his inheritance and likely because Boaz is ready to do this redeeming work. And so this is just sort of the official proclamation that he's done this. He's bought everything that was a possession, right, of Elimelech, of Naomi, of her two sons, that whole household. He's bought everything, and he's also marrying Ruth so that their family line will continue on. So this is a great moment. This is kind of the official act of redemption happening here. Let's then finally go to Ruth 4, verses 15 through 17. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age, for your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more than you to 7 sons, has given birth to him. Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse. And the children of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, A son has been born to Naomi. They named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. So we want to take this last part 2 ways. One, what an appropriate and wonderful end to this story, right? The story begins with all this death and suffering occurring, and it ends with Naomi with a bouncing baby boy on her lap. right? All things are not lost because she has been redeemed by God through Boaz. And therefore now there is joy and there is this new life to celebrate. And if that wouldn't be a good enough end of the story, we find out that in fact this child now is going to be in the line of Jesse, who is the father of David. And therefore, we see that this now relates not only to David's lineage, but those of us living where we do, we know that ultimately, of course, then the Messiah will come in David's line. And so this then becomes a story about Jesus's own lineage. And think about this overall, what a wonderful reminder this is, that God can work through much suffering. At times in the Bible, he works through much disobedience. All of these things do not stop him from bringing about his plan of salvation, or to put it better for this book, his plan of redemption, of buying us with his holy, innocent, precious blood back from the troubles that we have gotten into because of our sin, and giving us new and eternal life to look forward to. Yes, that here is this book of Ruth. The basic theme is that God redeems his people, and that's true, of course, of Naomi and Ruth. It's also blessedly true of you and me. I hope this study has piqued your interest in this book, and maybe you'll go back and read the entire book. It's not a very long book at all. Go back and read the book of Ruth and see all the details there. We'll be back again soon with another book of the Bible. Until then, God's peace be with you.